guys, welcome back to my channel. So today I wanted to finally get into the spoiler side of Brandon Sanderson's standalone book, Warbreaker. This is the first Brandon Sanderson book that I have ever read, and is still the only Brandon Sanderson book that I have ever read. We'll link the video to my non-spoiler review down below, but basically I loved it. Magic system, world building, a lot of the characters, and just the explosive ending really got to me. I was kind of blown away by this book. I haven't read anything like it before, and I'm excited to get into it. So I saw something on Reddit. There isn't a ton about Warbreaker out there, not a lot of discussion about the book, but what I did see was that it is a lot more divisive of a novel than I realized. I read it and I was like, this is great, I love this, this was so fun and interesting and thought-provoking, and then I get online and a lot of people, especially those who seem to have read a lot of Brandon Sanderson's previous work, really did not like it. So I brought up something that I found on Reddit where they kind of bullet point what they like and don't like, and I thought I would just kind of go through and say if I agree, if I disagree, and kind of let it take us through my thoughts on the book. So if you like this kind of video, make sure to give it a like and subscribe, and let's get started. Okay, so this person gave this book a 4 out of 5, and even though they really liked it, they said that they didn't feel that it was up to the level of his other works. This is what this person is giving for pros and cons. So we're starting out with the pros. Fantastic world building and magic. Absolutely. I have never ever, and maybe this just shows my ignorance and the different world building and magic systems out there, but I've never read anything like this before. Just the way Hollandrin sounded, it felt, I could just feel it, I could just see it, but I also couldn't place it. And I think that's really interesting when I feel like I know a world, but it's genuinely not one that I've ever seen in real life. The capital, where the gods were, and their crazy monochromatic pyramids, and just everything being really over the top and massive, and just an explosion of color everywhere you go. I could just see it, I felt it. And then of course the magic system, which I still don't necessarily have a grasp on, although I kind of did when I was reading it. I wasn't lost by any means. I don't think I could repeat to you the rules right now, but just the fact that it worked off of color and the concept of breath was so interesting, and again, something I'm like, that feels right. I get it. I understand. I get what a breath is. I get why you would need color to transform something, or colors becoming more vivid the more breath you have. It intuitively felt right to me, which I also think is interesting. I don't know why that works, but it does. Another pro, Light Song, a god who doesn't believe in gods. I have mixed feelings about Light Song. I really liked him. And someone mentioned this down in the comments that they kind of found Light Song's humor to be a little cringe, and I can't entirely disagree. I would sometimes just read him and get frustrated. It just felt like he wasn't getting to the point. He wasn't saying what was on his mind, and it was consistent. We had a very distinguished voice, but yeah, there was something about him that could sometimes be grating. That being said, I still really liked him. I never was rolling my eyes when we got to his POV chapter. I was like, we're hanging out with the gods now, let's get to it. I loved learning about what the gods did all day, looking at all these paintings or pieces of art that people brought to them and trying to find some sort of prophecy within them, which he doesn't believe, but he still takes the time to do so, or listening to people who want to be healed from him, and yeah, just kind of his disdain for this religion that he's inherently a part of, and that you can't really deny that he's a part of because he died and was brought back to life. He's a god now. You can't deny that kind of religion, and yet you could feel why he would kind of turn his nose up at that thing. And I thought his death and just his story at the end was so utterly fantastic that absolutely overshadows any issues that I had with him. Another pro, Ciri. I really liked her attitude and plan to deal with her situation. I also loved Ciri. I felt quite a kinship to Ciri, maybe because I was also once a 17-year-old girl who never listened to anybody and got myself in troublesome situations. So I liked her quite a bit. I felt a lot of sympathy for her. Her story was kind of weird because I felt like you spend a lot of time with her in the beginning of the book, kind of in the middle, and then it kind of drops off, and I wish we stayed with her more throughout, because that was one where I never lost interest in her story. I never felt bored. I loved her interactions with the God King. She was a fish out of water, so she doesn't understand what's going on. We don't understand what's going on, so I definitely felt like I was going through this journey with her in a very intimate way. Her interactions with the Night King I thought were great. I thought they were really interesting, and they made me, so tense and anxious and then just excited. Like, I felt like there was just something bigger brewing, something happening. I really liked Ciri, and I liked her transformation of being this rebellious teenage girl who doesn't care. Not that she doesn't care about anything, but she's not really paying attention to the bigger issues of the world, to someone who's very intently paying attention to the politics and is very involved with the politics and trying to outmaneuver the people who have been there forever, and she's only been there for a few months, kind of becoming more mature because of that. I think that's really interesting. I loved her storyline. I thought she was great. The ending was explosive and exciting. 1000% agree. Love that ending. Really good. Never saw it coming. From the way Blushweaver died to Lightsong giving up his breath to the God King who saved Ciri from a sacrifice, to Viviana and the mercenaries who also turned out to be gods, and then bringing those statues throughout the city to life, and it turns out that they're a part of this secret army that you hear throughout the book. Just brilliant, just so good. I could not put down the last 200, 150 pages. I did not want to set down my book. Okay, but the cons, the interesting stuff. Okay, and this is just what this person says. Con, sexual moralizing. The fact that Sanderson is a Mormon is often discussed, but I've never seen any heavy influence on his writing until Warbreaker. It really bothered me that Blushweaver was presented as untrustworthy because she was seductive, whereas Ciri was the hero who waited and only slept with her husband, who she loved. I don't really agree with this. I didn't really feel like there was sexual moralizing in the book. Not really. I didn't feel like the author was kind of wagging his finger at me by any means. I mean, Ciri was brought into this really intense and horrible situation, and for the first third of the book, she's expecting, and you as the reader are expecting, her to get raped by this God King that everybody is afraid of. And with the Blushweaver, I don't really understand this line about she's presented as untrustworthy because she was seductive. I did not get that at all. Yeah, she was obviously super hyper sexualized, but I didn't strike her as untrustworthy because she was seductive. I didn't even really necessarily see her as untrustworthy. I definitely thought she was scheming, and I thought she was playing the game of politics and trying to get Lightsong involved. Felt like she was genuinely interested in the politics, and that she genuinely did not want things to escalate to a war, and she was trying to use what influence she had to prevent that from happening, and it was scheming and maybe a little power hungry, but ultimately to not cause a war. They talk about later on that the returned, that the gods in this world kind of come back as their idealized forms of beauty, because he mentions that there are some that are returned that look drastically different, who are much plumper or much older, and the return don't really age that much. Blushweaver came back as super hyper sexualized woman, but you get the sense that's what she wanted, that that's what she chose to become, and is choosing to present herself in that way. That's what she likes. I don't know. I liked Blushweaver. I liked Blush Weaver a lot. She kind of suffered in the same way that I thought Light Song did, with her dialogue and her sense of humor being kind of weird and a tiny bit off-putting, but like, I thought she was cool. They also say, speaking of Blush Weaver, her arc or lack of one didn't seem thought through. She got built up but no resolution. I thought the build up was that she kept saying that she's trying to prevent this war and that she's kind of scheming, but you're not sure you can entirely trust her, and then it turns out at the end she was in fact doing what she said she was doing, and then gets killed for it. Blush Weaver was by no means the most fleshed out character in this book, I will give you that. She's not a main character, she's not a POV character, so I'm not mad at that. She's an interesting side character and I'm okay with that. Vivienna, for some reason I didn't like her, especially at the beginning, although she did get better. It didn't feel right that the prim and proper sister would run away to launch a rescue/revolt. Okay, I love Vivienna. I love her. I loved her. She was so interesting to me. And this is something I've actually read, you know, what little bit that I could about people's opinions about Warbreaker. There turned out to be a lot of people that did not like Vivienna. Like, oh, she was annoying. And I don't know what to make of that, is because it's like, yeah, but that's the point. It's not like she wasn't written to be very moralizing or to have very strong negative opinions about this place, but I think they make sense in her character. Of course she would hate Hollandrin and everybody in Hollandrin when, as she mentions throughout the book, like her childhood got taken away from her. She didn't get to live like a normal kid because she thought she was going to be married off to this king to be raped and have his child for the sake of this treaty between their two lands, and she was totally willing to take on that role, and she kind of saw it as like, this is her being brave for her country, and the fact that Ciri did it instead, I think she felt undercut by that. Like, yes, she's prim and proper, but trying to be the best sacrificial daughter that she can for her nation, and the fact that she didn't get to fulfill that didn't give her relief and made her even more like angry and anxious. So I believed it entirely that she would go off to try to rescue her sister, and then she gets caught up in this scheme, which I loved. I loved her in the Mercenaries. I loved the Mercenaries. I actually thought they were kind of funny. And when the big reveal happens and it turns out they kidnapped her without her realizing she was being kidnapped, and killed her friend and turned out to be these like terrible people, that shocked me. That horrified me. I did not see that coming. That scene in the basement, just, I couldn't believe it. I felt like her. I felt the shock and the horror and kind of like, wow, I really don't know what's going on. Like, she thinks that she has a better handle over the city and its politics and the type of people in the world, and she doesn't. She thought all of this training and education would have her be prepared for such a thing. It wasn't enough. Not until she has this major betrayal, becomes homeless for a week, and then when Vasher rescues her again, actually shows her how to use breath and all of that stuff, does she start to feel like she's more competent and can be more confident going through the world, and starts to realize all her mistakes and how her hatred for Hollandrin, her hatred for the people in Hollandrin, and thinking they're so different than her, so below her, is what got her into trouble in the first place. I really liked her. I think in a lot of ways she is kind of the star of the show, and that seems to be not a particularly popular opinion, but that's okay. And then for the last con, they say slow pacing after a good opening. I felt the book dragged and it took a while for things to happen. I didn't necessarily feel that, maybe a little bit slow, but jumping between the different POVs, the world building, and the magic system, there was so much going on that kept me incredibly engaged throughout the entire story. But I will agree that the ending is really when like things happen, which is great. I prefer that a book be moving towards something and for that something to be big than start out great and like have an ending that whimpers. So a few pros that weren't mentioned here. Vasher and his sentient sword Nightblood were so cool. That is something where, again, haven't read anything like that. A sentient object that is obsessed with killing people or destroying evil, but that can like talk to the guy. Oh man, that's some good stuff. And it's kind of a morality test too. Like that is so cool. And I'm so glad that Vasher turned out to be a good guy, because you kind of get a fake out that he's like after to kill Viviana and that he's like someone who's out to destroy things, and then it turns out that he's one of the driving forces in like stopping this war, and he and Viviana like might have like a, you know, flirtation going on. I think that's very cute. I love it. I was very absorbed in this world, and I could never quite feel like I knew where the story was going, and not like, oh, this author doesn't know what they're doing, but in a very like, I just don't know what's gonna happen next, and that's very, very exciting for me. I love that feeling in a book, and I found a lot of the twists to be very interesting and caught me off my guard, but didn't not made sense, except a lot of this book hinges on the fact that there's another neighboring kingdom that feels very repressed, and it turns out they are the ones that have kind of infiltrated the capital and the gods, and are the ones who want to start this war between these other nations so they can kind of infiltrate and take over. And I did not feel that that was foreshadowed nearly enough. That was kind of something that felt underdeveloped. It didn't feel like they had a solid villain for that. Kind of Blue Fingers, but he didn't feel like a very satisfying villain for me. Again, it's kind of a twist with like, oh, this priest seems like such a jerk. You think it's going to be the priest who's evil and who's hurting the god king and all that. And it turns out, nope, they really were protecting him and they really were protecting their religion. But that's one where the twist, I'm not sure entirely worked for me. Not that it's inherently bad, but that it wasn't built up enough. And again, I think there should have been a stronger villain. And then I was a little taken aback when it turned out that Vasher and that other mercenary guy, the main mercenary guy whose name escapes me, but the one that had kidnapped Viviana and that was like mortal enemies with Vasher, which I thought was really interesting. I really, really liked those storylines. But when it turned out that Vasher and that guy were actually returned in like disguise somehow, I didn't quite understand that, and maybe I didn't read it right. I didn't understand how that worked, like how they were able to transform themselves from looking like gods to looking like mortal men. I don't remember that being established as something the Return can do in the book. And granted, I think they were different because they were a part of the, oh God. And I understand that he was one of the original Returned, I think, so maybe that's why he got that special power, but it kind of came out of nowhere to me. And yes, then you get that cool reveal that because he was a Return, he has one of those like goofy names and his name is Warbreaker. And I really liked that. I was like, oh, I thought that was a good ending. And I like that he and Viviana are just gonna go off and have adventures together. Oh, what I didn't like was Ciri and Viviana like finally meeting each other. You know, their storylines are like not connected, but they are, and you know both of them are in the city, and you want them to meet up, and you think it's gonna be this whole thing, and it's like very, very anticlimactic, and that was such a shame to me because I really wanted there to be this heart-to-heart and really understanding that they are such different people than they were a few months ago, and like really having that, I don't know, sister bond because now it seems like they're going to be separated from each other. Like Viviana is going to leave, so, and to not have that sense of closure between them and that sense of like, wow, like especially especially Ciri to Viviana, to be like, wow, you really do love me, and you did so much, and Viviana being like, yeah, you're a lot braver, you're a lot more mature and responsible than I gave you credit for, and just having that understanding. I was really looking for that, and they didn't have that at all. It was like 2 sentences to each other. I don't know. That had to be my biggest disappointment in the book, and it's like a pretty big disappointment, but again, that's at the end, and the end has such explosive plot points that it's kind of easy to ignore that or look past it because there's so much more going on, but still something that I wish was included. Alright guys, well, thank you so much for watching this spoiler review. Please feel free to leave your comments and opinions about said book in the comment section below. I think this book is really interesting, and there's so much to dissect. I have barely covered the surface of this book. Maybe I'll get into it again in the future, but definitely leave your comments down below, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any book reviews in the future, and I will see you guys next time. Bye.